Hello again, good morning. As Europe adjusts to a rapidly changing security environment, the United Kingdom is facing a stark new reality. The days of guaranteed US protection are fading. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has pledged to increase defence spending and reshape Britain's military strategy. But will that be enough as the shadow of Trump's America First policy grows larger? Meanwhile, European leaders are stepping up to fill the void left by Washington's wavering support for Ukraine. New defence initiatives and bold financial commitments are taking shape. But can Europe truly become a security leader without the United States? Let's get in focus. So, with growing doubts over America's commitment to NATO, the UK is confronting hard choices about its defence spending, foreign aid and long-term strategic priorities. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has promised a major military overhaul, but analysts say Britain's political class is still clinging to outdated assumptions about US protection. Can Britain adapt quickly enough to secure its place in a more dangerous world and less predictable world? The Financial Times warns that British politicians remain stuck in the old mindset of automatic US support. Despite raising defence spending to 2.5% of GDP and promises to hit 3%, analysts say this is still too slow and too modest for the scale of the threat. With Trump openly questioning NATO's future and pushing allies to fend for themselves, the UK must make tough choices, either cut domestic programmes or raise taxes to pay for rearmament. Either way, the era of low defence spending is over, and British politics has yet to fully reckon with that reality. And to explore this evolving landscape, we're joined by Greg Swenson, who's the chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Welcome back to In Focus, Greg. Thank you very much for being here with us. So Britain has pledged to raise defence spending. Many say it's still not enough. How urgently does the UK need to rearm and up its defence spending?
Yeah, Mark, it's a great question. I don't think it's urgent in terms of timing. I think what's happened with the Russia and Ukraine conflict is it's inspired the Western European countries to reconsider their defense and security policies. And so that's good news. I don't think it's urgent, like it doesn't have to happen overnight. But the UK has slowly, been reducing defense spending over the years to the point where it's just inadequate. Again, the UK is punching above its weight in terms, compared to many other European countries, especially the large economies like Germany, France, Spain, Italy. But I do think they need to increase the spending. I think that's become a reality, not just because of the fairness of, the US providing this guarantee and the European countries not meeting their requirements, but also it's better for Europe, and it also and will allow the US to pivot toward Asia. And I think the UK will be very much involved with that pivot to Asia. They have assets around the world. They have a substantial navy, nothing like it used to be. But I think that it'll be more working in partnership with the U.S., not in spite of the U.S.
And as, of course, you're an American Republican, so you're a small state guy.
Yeah.
Starmer, of course, is going to have some difficult trade-offs. He's already cut foreign aid. Do you think he's going to have to raise taxes as well?
I hope not, but I think that's always a possibility with a Labor government or any political party on the left, and that's always a risk.
You say that, I'm just going to interrupt a second, because if defense has to be paid for, it's got to come from somewhere, right?
Right, and I think it's, so obviously it's either higher taxes or lower spending elsewhere, and I would argue that lowering spending elsewhere is the right move. Raising taxes doesn't necessarily come with a commensurate increase in tax revenues. In fact, if they really wanted to increase tax revenues, they'd lower the tax rate to create economic growth and higher wages. And that ends up leading to its classic supply side argument. But I do think there's a risk of that. But it has to come from somewhere. And again, this increase in defense spending is long overdue. The military here, both the Navy and the Army in the UK, is just not up to its prior standards. And so they're going to have to do this. It's better for the US, it's better for the UK, and frankly, it's better for the West. And so, I hope it happens quickly, but it doesn't, I wouldn't call it an emergency, unless they plan on going into, Ukraine and fighting in that war, which is not the intention. So, it's probably refreshing to see both the UK and the other Western European countries trying to step up. Right now, it's just talk, and it's been talk for 3 years. The Germans, made a big policy change back in February of 2022, and then they shelved it, within a year or so. So, we have to see action, not just talk. But it sounds like the prime minister is serious about this, and I think they will have to look for spending cuts elsewhere.
And for a long time, the UK has relied on its special relationship, as it likes to call it, with the White House, whoever might be in office. Is that relationship still reliable, do you think?
Yeah, it really is. And I think it will be different for the UK as opposed to the other Western European countries. So I think that special relationship is there. President Trump really likes the UK. They also don't have a significant trade surplus with the US. They might even have a deficit. But whether it's a surplus or a deficit, it's minimal. And so President Trump doesn't have a natural sort of built-in conflict in terms of trade, where he's got, the US has a major trade deficit with the EU, but that's not the case with the UK. So no, and President Trump really likes the UK. He's got connections, Scottish heritage, for example. He had 2 visits in his first term. He's got another state visit coming up. So the president has a great relationship with the king, with Prince William. He had a great relationship with the Queen, and also with Boris Johnson when he was prime minister. So I think he'll develop a relationship with Keir Starmer. That's already started. They had dinner in the fall during the campaign. And then, as you saw last week with the prime minister visiting the White House, that was a very productive and diplomatic visit.
And they seem to get on very well. They certainly get on better than Trump did with Zelensky in the meetings last week. Some people in Britain, when it comes to the politicians and people in Whitehall, some believe that Trump can still be managed with diplomacy. Do you think that's realistic?
Yeah, I think that's possible. I'm not sure that he needs to be managed diplomatically. I think, again, he's got a great relationship with the UK. I don't think you'll see the kind of tariff threats, to the UK that you'll see elsewhere. He just wants to make sure things are reciprocal. So if there are tariffs coming from our trading partners, he just wants to have, he used that word constantly in his speech the other night. As long as it's reciprocal. So I think there's a great future for the US-UK relationship.
Britain, of course, used to play a massive role, like the United States does now, on the world stage. It's been diminished in recent decades.
Yeah.
But does this create an opportunity for Britain to play a much bigger role, and as you mentioned, the phrase "punching above its weight"?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it does. It is quite diminished versus, their sort of their glorious past of the British Empire. But they've been paying, at least 2% of GDP, or significantly more than 2%. So they've never been on the list of countries that are not meeting their minimum standards. Granted, again, it's still inadequate compared to what they were even 20 years ago. The Army is dramatically smaller. Many fewer ships are sailing. The carrier's been, they're inadequate to say the least, the carrier fleet. So I think it's a chance to upgrade. It's never going to be the great British Empire of 100 years ago, but it's a really important partner with the United States. They do have a really powerful military presence in the world. Of course, not compared to the US, but compared to everybody else, it's pretty significant. And I think it'll be really important to upgrade and then continue that partnership with the U.S.
I think it's worth mentioning that you mentioned the British Empire and called it glorious and great. I'm sure many viewers watching right now might not agree with those terms.
Yeah, I think you're right, Mark.
But the UK economy is in a mess. I mean, since
Yeah,
Brexit, with COVID and everything, it's an absolute mess.
yeah.
How on earth is the country going to afford to defend Ukraine?
Yeah, I think again, it's got to be spending cuts and liberate the economy. And I'm not sure that the Labor government will do that. And I'm not picking on Labor here. I mean, the Conservative, the Tory party was just as bad, governing in many ways from the economic left. They had tax increases, they had price caps, they had windfall taxes, fracking ban, fracking ban on natural gas development. So, they did a lot of things that were destructive to the economy. 20 years ago, the United Kingdom was energy independent. Now they import virtually all their energy and power. And so it's going to be a massive turnaround if they choose to do it. But if you tax and regulate, you're really going to tamper economic growth and wage growth. So I've started to see, some hints of deregulation from the Labor government, especially around housing. But there has to be a massive deregulation if they continue with the climate, the net zero climate policy. That's destructive to the economy. I'm starting to see that pushed to the back burner quite a bit. So, and again, that's not on Labor. I mean, that was very much part of the conservative government as well. So it's not only going to take, a change in party in 2029. I think it has to start now to liberate the economy, and that will ultimately end up with higher tax revenues.
Okay, I'm going to end it here, but always a pleasure to have you on, Greg
Thanks,
Svensson, who is from the chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Britain's defence rethink is just beginning, but the pace of change in global security means there's little time to waste. As Britain debates its role in Europe's defence, continental leaders are already moving forward. With US aid to Ukraine suspended, European capitals are stepping up with new spending and a renewed sense of urgency. But can Europe truly fill that gap? And what role will Germany, France and the UK play in this new security order? As President Trump freezes military aid to Ukraine, Europe has responded with speed and purpose. Leaders gathered in London and Brussels to announce new funding, military support and strategic coordination. But with divisions among EU members and questions about Germany's long-term leadership, can Europe sustain this momentum? The Atlantic Council reports that European leaders have taken unprecedented steps to fill the gap left by Washington. The British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, led the change, hosting a summit of European leaders to create a coalition of the willing for Ukraine. Germany, under likely future Chancellor Friedrich Merz, has also pledged a fiscal overhaul to boost defence spending, breaking with decades of German budget orthodoxy. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has called for a stronger, more sovereign Europe to lead its own defence. Now, to analyse this European response, we are joined by Nicholas Williams, who is a former NATO official. Thank you very much for joining us here on In Focus. Now, with Trump freezing US aid to Ukraine, how much pressure does that put on Europe to fill that gap? And is Europe capable?
No, it's not capable. It has to be recalled that Europe and the United States, until the advent of President Trump, were together. They were pursuing a common aim of supporting Ukraine, and they complemented each other. And particularly the United States urged, not that they needed urging, the Europeans to impose sanctions and so on. And so this was a joint endeavor. Now, if with a joint endeavor, a partner suddenly withdraws and changes changes direction, then the other partner, the Europe, actually can't do what the other is doing. And so, yes, as your previous interlocutor mentioned, and Europe is doing something, but not specifically immediately for Ukraine, but to try to put together an autonomous defense capability in case United States withdraws even more from Europe.
And I'm getting the view of the last week or so that Britain's role has been greatly amplified, perhaps for the first time since the Blair government. Britain is playing a major role on the world stage. Do you think Britain's post-Brexit place in Europe has increased in the last few weeks?
I'm not sure. Personally, I doubt it. I think it's the almost the panic of the British system faced with the collapse of the assumption that they've had of American support and American partnership, an assumption that's held good since the Second World War. And I think the British effort, in effect, is not to support Ukraine, but that's part of it. It's to try to persuade the Trump administration that Europe is serious about what he wants to be done with European defense. So it's not the world stage that the British are trying to influence. It's the Americans. And this is the traditional British idea, bridge between Europe and America.
When it comes to Germany, of course, Germany is going through lots of changes at the moment with the new government about to come in. They've decided to get rid of the debt brake and boost their military spending. Is this quite a big shift for Germany?
Well, it heralds a big shift. Merz, the next chancellor, has signaled that the United States is not as reliable as it was, and also signaled that they need to take action in terms of moving towards a more European defense. But he wants, equally as the British, not to destabilize the transatlantic link. So it's a hesitant step. But the problem is, all this is input oriented. All this defense thing is input oriented. What is the purpose of European defense and what is the structure? No one has actually defined that.
Yes, I mean, Macron has called for a sovereign Europe capable of defending itself. Are we looking at a European army?
Well, no, because the problem is NATO has the monopoly of multinational military capability. Unless NATO is reformed, then it actually crowds out any possibility of a European army. If the EU or the Europeans with the UK want to reform NATO, they can do it. But all militaries in NATO have their primary function as defense of the NATO area. And that's run by an American general. So while they're talking about autonomy, they're actually subservient to the United States in the form of NATO.
And you're a former NATO official. Without the United States, is NATO dead?
Without the United States, NATO is dead in a sense, because it wouldn't be as it were. But the structures of NATO, which make NATO competent and capable, the US only pays 16% of that running cost. If the US extracted itself, I think, and it won't do because it has so much power, but if the US extracted itself, it is possible that the structure could be preserved for a purely European context. I know it's technical, but the devil is in the detail, and the Europeans haven't actually addressed this detail yet.
Now we have the coalition of the willing. We're yet to know who's going to be a part of the coalition of the willing, apart from Britain and France and probably Germany. Do you think this could cause problems in the EU? Countries like Hungary perhaps being sidelined. Is this going to be a problem for European unity?
Not specifically, not greatly. You notice Hungary and now Slovakia. Yes, it differs from they differ from European policy towards Russia and towards Ukraine, but they never hold it up because they depend too much on European Union finance. So no, it won't be a problem. But anyway, this defense structure is non-existent, barely existent, I should say. And so any coalition of the willing has to be done outside the EU because the structures of the EU are feeble in terms of defense.
Okay. And do you think there's any chance that Europe, without the United States, could go it alone and be its own security power?
Yes, there's no doubt about that. It's just whether they have the will and whether they want to. At the moment, the UK, even if it's outside the EU, it believes that it has a primary role in defending Europe. The UK, Germany, and others want to preserve the transatlantic alliance. They want to rebalance it, but not exclude the United States because Russia has nuclear weapons in abundance, and only the United States can effectively deter Russia. So the Europeans are desperate not to destroy the transatlantic link.
Do you think there's any chance that Europe might start acquiring more nuclear weapons, and that we start perhaps, I don't want to sound hyperbolic, but start some kind of new nuclear arms race with Europe trying to defend itself?
I don't think so. The French, or Macron in his speech a few days ago, offered, as he's offered before, to enter into discussions about extending the French nuclear power, nuclear force, to embrace EU or Europe. And it is possible that the UK could enter into these discussions. But there's a profound hesitation in Europe about adding to the proliferation of nuclear weapons in the world. They hold by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which limits nuclear weapons to certain countries.
Well, that's a positive note to end on. Thank you very much, Nicholas Williams, a former NATO official. Thank you very much for joining us here on Q News. As Europe takes its security into its own hands, the next months could reshape both NATO and the wider transatlantic relationship. Thank you very much for joining us here on Q News. And join us again next time. Thank you.